It began with a whisper inside Luftwaffe intelligence rooms, a rumor that the Americans had built something extraordinary. A fighter so fast, so efficient, so brutally capable of high altitude that even the most seasoned German aces were uneasy. For months, Allied bomber crews spoke of a new escort fighter with a long nose, sleek wings, and a strange howl in the sky. A machine that hunted with cold precision, chasing down anything painted with a black cross. To the Luftwaffe, it was a ghost at first. Then it got a name, the P-51 Mustang. As 1944 unfolded, the war in the air over Europe was turning into a storm Germany could no longer stop. The once unstoppable Jagdwaffe was bleeding pilots daily. The FW-190s and Bf-109s, once kings of the sky, were suddenly outmatched above 25,000 feet. And every German officer wanted to know one thing. What made this American fighter so different? Why could it climb so quickly? Why could it stay with bombers all the way from England to the heart of the Reich? Why did every escort engagement end the same way, with a Mustang diving through the clouds, leaving German fighters burning behind it? For Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, this wasn't just a threat. It was humiliation. The propaganda machine claimed German aircraft were the best in the world. Yet bomber crews were reaching Berlin with growing confidence. And the Mustangs, those long-range predators, were making it happen. Göring wanted answers. But answers required something impossible. Capturing AP-51 intact, with its engine still working. And then, almost miraculously, one fell into German hands. In early 1944, AP-51B crash-landed behind German lines after a fuel system malfunction. The pilot survived, but the aircraft was nearly untouched. German recovery teams swarmed the wreck, astonished by what they found. An engine unlike anything in the Luftwaffe's frontline machines, a laminar flow wing design few nations had mastered, and an aerodynamic shape that seemed purpose-built for altitude dominance. But there was only one man the Luftwaffe trusted to evaluate something this significant. A man whose reputation stretched from the skies of Spain to the highest command rooms in Berlin. A man known for his sharp flying skills, sharper opinions, and a defiance that even Hitler struggled to control. His name was Adolf Galland. To the outside world, Galland was the charismatic General der Jagdflieger, Germany's general of fighters. But to those who flew with him, he was more than just a commander. He was a pilot's pilot, a man who believed that a fighter existed for one purpose only: to hunt, to chase, and to dominate the sky. He spent years fighting in the Messerschmitt Bf-109, scoring over 100 victories and becoming one of the Luftwaffe's greatest aces. Yet even he knew that German technology was falling behind. The Allies were evolving. The war was changing. And Germany's future in the air was growing darker. When Galland heard that a captured P-51 was ready for testing, he did not hesitate. He wanted to see the truth for himself. He wanted to know what the Luftwaffe was up against, what the Americans had created. But most of all, he wanted to fly the machine that every German pilot feared. The Mustang was brought to Rechlin, Germany's secret flight testing base. Engineers surrounded the aircraft, studying every curve, every bolt, every inch of wiring. And when Galland arrived, he examined it the way only an ace could, with a pilot's intuition, not just a technician's eye. He ran his hand across the wing's surface, feeling how smooth it was. He studied the Meredith effect radiator design, realizing how cleverly it reduced drag. He sat inside the cockpit, noting the spacious layout, the excellent visibility, the powerful controls. Then came the engine, the heart of the machine. When German mechanics opened the cowling, even the most experienced engineers fell silent. The Mustang was equipped with a Packard-built version of the Rolls-Royce Merlin, a power plant that blended British engineering brilliance with American mass production efficiency. It was the perfect union of technology and industrial might. But it was the climb performance that everyone was obsessed with. Pilots returning from the front reported Mustangs shooting up from below like arrows. No warning, no hesitation, just pure acceleration. Something about its power-to-weight ratio, its aerodynamic lift, and its supercharger efficiency allowed the P-51 to claw into the sky in a way no European aircraft could match. Galland wanted to feel that with his own hands. And so, one crisp morning, he ordered the Mustang fueled and checked. Crew members watched silently as he pulled on his flight gear. They knew this wasn't a typical test flight. This was a meeting between two legends, one human, one machine. A German ace stepping into an American fighter that was reshaping the war. When he settled into the cockpit, Galland felt something unexpected: admiration. He had flown dozens of aircraft, but nothing felt quite like this. The controls were light yet firm. The visibility was breathtaking. And when he pushed the throttle forward, the Merlin engine unleashed a sound that echoed across the airfield. A deep, confident growl that promised raw power. What Galland would experience next would shock even him. A moment so unexpected, so unbelievable, that he later said those words that shook German high command. This climb performance. It is impossible for Europe. And it was only the beginning. Galland eased the throttle forward, and the captured Mustang surged down the runway with a confidence that felt almost alive. The Merlin engine didn't scream the way a DB605 did. It roared with a smoother, deeper tone, more refined, more controlled. As the wheels lifted off the concrete and the Mustang's wings sliced into the cold German air, Galland immediately felt something unsettling. The aircraft wasn't fighting him. It wasn't straining to climb. It wanted to go higher on its own. He raised the landing gear and gently pulled back on the stick. The Mustang didn't climb, it jumped. Galland later described the moment as the most shocking experience of his test flights. He expected a strong ascent. He expected a capable engine. But he did not expect the sensation of the aircraft levitating upward, as though someone had quietly removed gravity's permission. The P-51 rose through the air column with an authority he had never felt before, not even the newest Bf-109s or FW-190s. At 10,000 feet, he pushed the throttle harder. The Mustang responded instantly, climbing steeper, faster, smoother. German fighters at the time struggled at high altitude, losing oxygen pressure and engine responsiveness. But this American machine, it behaved like altitude didn't matter. The supercharger delivered air with a kind of optimism, feeding the engine with uninterrupted power as the altimeter needle spun upward. Galland stared in disbelief. He later said, "Impossible for Europe." He didn't say it as praise. He said it as a warning. The Luftwaffe had been fighting for years over the skies of Europe, relying on aircraft that pushed their limits. But here, right in his hands, was proof that the Allies had leaped ahead not by inches but by miles. He leveled out, and then he began testing the aircraft the way only a seasoned ace could. He rolled it left, then right. Smooth, predictable, no lag, no sluggishness. The laminar flow wings, a concept many German engineers still debated, cut through the air with remarkable stability. At high speed, the Mustang stayed firm, resisting the dangerous compressibility issues that plagued many fighters in steep dives. Then came the turning tests. Galland dove slightly, banking hard to see how the Mustang handled a tight combat turn. His breath caught. The P-51 didn't bleed energy the way he expected. Most fighters lost airspeed dramatically in a tight, sustained turn, especially when trying to keep guns on target. But the Mustang kept its momentum, almost feeling lighter than physics should allow. This was the secret. Not just power, not just speed, but the ability to keep fighting at high altitude without sacrificing energy. For Galland, the realization hit like a punch. If Germany didn't match this technology soon, the air war would be over, and not in their favor. He pushed the aircraft into a dive next, wanting to understand how it behaved in a chase. The Mustang accelerated as though weightless, the altimeter spinning downward as the ground rushed into view. Many planes shook or bucked to high speed. The Mustang stayed smooth, frighteningly smooth. As he pulled out of the dive, he understood another Allied advantage. This wasn't a machine built only for aces. It was built for the average pilot. Its forgiving handling meant even a fresh pilot, with only a few months of training, could sit in this cockpit and survive against seasoned German veterans. This terrified Galland more than anything, because Germany no longer had time for long training. The Jagdwaffe was sending teenagers, sometimes with as little as 50 flight hours, into combat, and they were being cut down by Mustangs flown by well-trained American crews who could fly for hours without worrying about fuel, engine temperature, or sudden power loss. The P-51 was more than an aircraft. It was a multiplying force. After an hour of flight testing, Galland returned to the airfield. But instead of feeling relief as the wheels touched down, he felt dread. He had witnessed the future of air combat, and it belonged to the enemy. Inside the Reckland briefing room, Luftwaffe engineers waited impatiently for his verdict. They expected praise for German craftsmanship where applicable, criticism of American weaknesses, anything they could use. Galland removed his gloves, placed them on the table, and said quietly, "The Mustang is the best all-round fighter in the world." The room went silent. He continued explaining the climb characteristics, emphasizing that nothing Germany had in mass production could match it. He pointed out that even the upcoming Bf-109K series and the FW-190D were only partial answers, still struggling above 25,000 feet. And though the revolutionary Me-262 jet was promising, it was plagued by reliability issues and limited availability. Then he said it, the remark that shocked even the engineers. "This climb power, this is impossible for Europe." They pressed him for details. Why impossible? What made it so extraordinary? Galland explained that it wasn't one single factor. It was a combination, a perfect storm of strategic design choices. The laminar flow wings reduced drag dramatically. The radiator system created plume thrust, effectively adding power. The Merlin's two-stage supercharger delivered altitude performance unmatched in German fighters. The cockpit ergonomics gave pilots faster reaction time in combat situations. And the fuel efficiency? It let the aircraft escort bombers from Britain to Berlin and all the way back. Then he shared a detail few Germans knew. The Americans had hundreds, soon thousands, more of these Mustangs coming. One engineer whispered, "If this is true, then the war is already lost." Galland did not argue. Yet even during this grim analysis, the captured P-51 inspired genuine fascination. German mechanics were stunned by how easy it was to service. Test pilots admired its stability. Designers studied its wing profile with almost academic curiosity. Germany tried to replicate pieces of the Mustang's success, but it was too late. The Allied production machine was unstoppable, and the P-51 was only getting better. But the full impact of Galland's test flight was yet to come, a dramatic moment in the final months of the war, when the Luftwaffe would face the Mustang not as engineers, but as desperate pilots fighting for survival. The true weight of Galland's discovery didn't fall on German command rooms. It fell on the everyday pilots who strapped themselves into Bf-109s and FW-190s as the Allies unleashed massive bomber raids across the Reich. It fell on the young men who scrambled at the sound of sirens, only to climb into the sky and meet a wall of Mustangs waiting for them. By late 1944, the Mustang had become a shadow over Germany. It escorted bombers all the way from England to factories in Leipzig, synthetic fuel plants in Politz, and airfields across Bavaria. Wherever German fighters formed up, the Mustangs appeared, diving out of the sun, slashing through formations, chasing scattered pilots deep into German territory. What Adolf Galland had felt in that test flight, thousands of his own men now experienced as terror. The climb power he described as impossible for Europe was now punching holes through the Luftwaffe's defenses. A German pilot would spot a formation of P-51s below him, roll to dive, and suddenly realize the Americans were climbing into the attack faster than he could escape downward. The old rules of air combat, altitude advantage, surprise dives, momentum tactics were eroding. Galland had seen the truth. Now the entire Luftwaffe was forced to confront it. As 1945 approached, the situation grew desperate. The Allies had numerical superiority, fuel supplies, and aircraft reliability. Germany had shrinking resources, failing logistics, and pilots with barely enough hours to manage a landing. The air war was no longer a duel. It was an avalanche, and the Mustang was at its front edge. Inside command bunkers, Galland watched reports pile up. Entire fighter units wiped out. New pilots lost on their first sortie. Bomber streams reaching Berlin untouched, covered by swarms of P-51s that seemed to fill the sky. Goring demanded miracles. Galland, increasingly outspoken, told him the truth. Miracles were not coming. The P-51 had changed the balance of power permanently. Germany pinned its final hopes on the revolutionary Me-262 jet fighter. Fast, sleek, capable of outrunning Mustangs easily. But jets were fragile, engines failed constantly, and Allied bombers targeted their runways relentlessly. Whenever a Me-262 tried to take off or land, the Mustangs swooped in like hawks. The jet's raw speed meant nothing when it was most vulnerable at low altitude. One day, Galland stood on a German airfield watching the smoke rising from a bombed-out hangar. A group of young pilots, some barely 17, walked past him toward their aircraft, faces pale, eyes hollow. He knew many of them would not return. He knew the P-51s patrolling the skies would find them before they even formed up. The climb power he had once admired now haunted him. He had flown the machine. He knew its strengths. And now he was watching his own men die under its shadow. Still, Galland was not the sort to accept defeat quietly. When he was finally removed from his position as general of fighters for criticizing high command, he returned to what he loved most, flying. He formed a special unit, Jagdverband 44, flying the Me-262 jet in the last chaotic months of the war. Even then, the Mustangs remained a constant threat, circling the skies above every German runway. If a jet pilot survived his mission, he had to land with Mustangs diving after him, trying to destroy the aircraft before it touched the ground. Galland flew again and again, dodging P-51 attacks, using the jet's tremendous speed to slip away. But he knew the truth. No matter how advanced the Me-262 was, it could not change the outcome of the war. The Allies had numbers, fuel, and the long-range fighter Galland had tested months earlier. The aircraft whose performance he described as impossible. As Germany collapsed in the spring of 1945, Galland found himself reflecting on that test flight at Rechlin. In the skies above the burning cities, he sometimes caught distant glimpses of Mustangs diving on columns of smoke, escorting formations of B-17s and B-24s as they hammered the last remnants of German industry. The sound of the Merlin engine, smooth, confident, relentless, became one of the final sounds of the air war. Not long after the surrender, Galland was interviewed by Allied officers curious about German evaluations of captured aircraft. They asked him bluntly, why did the Mustangs dominate the Luftwaffe in the last year of the war? Galland leaned back, calm, honest as always. They had the altitude, the speed, the range, and they had thousands more coming. But there was something else. He paused, remembering the shock he felt as the P-51 leapt skyward under his control. No European aircraft could match its climb. Not then, not even close. That was the moment I knew the war was lost. The Americans asked if the Luftwaffe had underestimated the Mustang. Galland shook his head. No, we never underestimated it. We simply could not build anything like it. The industry was not there. The fuel was not there. Time was not there. His words became one of the most famous acknowledgments of the Mustang's superiority. After the war, Galland lived quietly in Argentina before eventually returning to Germany. He wrote memoirs, consulted on aviation projects, and remained respected among pilots worldwide, Allied and Axis alike. And in many interviews, he remained consistent. The P-51 was the most effective all-around fighter of the war. The Mustang itself became a symbol, not of American power, but of what happens when technology, strategy, and industrial force combine into one perfectly timed creation. It wasn't just an aircraft. It was a turning point, a blade that cut the Luftwaffe's strength in half. A machine so capable that even one of Germany's greatest aces could not deny its brilliance. And somewhere in the archival silence of Rechlin, a test log still contains Galland's own handwriting, recorded after that unbelievable climb. Performance exceptional. Climb phenomenal. A fighter beyond anything in Europe. A final, humble truth from a man who had seen the war from the cockpit, and who knew, better than anyone, how a single aircraft helped decide the fate of the skies over Europe.